For 6 years, Michael Turner lived with the grief of believing his Indian bride had been brutally killed overseas. But when he suddenly spotted her alive and standing beside his own twin brother, the life he thought he knew shattered in an instant. What secret chain of lies could convince a woman to vanish from her husband's world and reappear in his brother's? Michael Turner had always been the steady one in his family, the 10 minutes older twin brother who played by the rules while others stumbled. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado, he built a respectable career as a mechanical engineer, lived in a modest townhouse, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who believed in order, routine, and honesty. By the time he was 30, he had everything he thought he wanted except someone to share it with. That changed in 2016 when he traveled to India for a short-term assignment through his company. What began as a professional trip would lead him into a love story that felt like destiny. Her name was Anaya Sharma, a 25-year-old from Pune, who worked as an interpreter for international companies. She was warm, elegant, and spoke English with a soft lilt that charmed everyone around her. Michael first met her during a conference call where she helped him navigate cultural nuances with clients. Their connection was immediate, almost electric. After work, they stayed in touch, first with polite messages, then with long conversations that stretched late into the night. Anaya carried herself with a balance of tradition and modernity, wearing colorful saris one day, jeans and a blouse the next. To Michael, she seemed like a bridge between two worlds, and he found himself drawn not just to her beauty, but to her resilience, her quiet strength, and her curiosity about the world beyond India. Their courtship was fast, perhaps too fast, but Michael believed it was fate. He extended his stay in India, visiting temples with her, meeting her family, learning how to eat with his hands and savor spices that burned his throat. Anaya laughed at his clumsiness but always encouraged him, telling her parents that Michael was a good man. The Sharmas were cautious, deeply rooted in tradition, but they saw his sincerity and accepted him. Within a year, Michael and Anaya married in a hybrid ceremony that blended his American customs with her Hindu rituals. He wore a sherwani and exchanged vows beneath a canopy of marigolds. She came to Colorado soon after, and together they began to build a life that seemed blessed. Their first years in Denver were a mix of discovery and adjustment. Michael introduced her to snowy winters, Thanksgiving dinners, and Sunday football games. Anaya filled their home with Indian cooking, string lights, and Bollywood music. Friends admired how seamlessly they seemed to blend two different worlds, yet beneath the surface, challenges simmered. Anaya often grew homesick, calling her parents daily and speaking wistfully of the festivals she missed. Michael, though supportive, struggled to understand the depth of her longing. At times, their conversations turned tense. He wanted her fully rooted in Denver. She wanted to keep a strong tether to India. Still, love seemed to smooth over the cracks, at least for a while. Then in 2017, tragedy struck. Anaya had returned to India for what was supposed to be a short visit to care for her ailing aunt. Michael couldn't join her because of work deadlines, so he kissed her goodbye at the airport, promising he'd see her in a month. Weeks later, he received a phone call from her uncle, his voice breaking as he delivered the news. Anaya had been killed in a roadside attack outside Pune. The story was grim and confusing. Armed men had ambushed a car she was traveling in, and her body had been cremated in accordance with Hindu rites before Michael could even travel there. The shock nearly destroyed him. He contacted local authorities, the U.S. consulate, anyone who could provide clarity, but every door seemed to close. The official story was simple. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in violence. She could not escape. Her uncle handled all the arrangements, assuring Michael that the family had followed tradition. When Michael pressed for details, he was told only that the body had been burned beyond recognition and that the family wanted to spare him the pain of seeing it. Grief consumed him. Friends recalled how he stopped going out, how his once bright demeanor dimmed into a shadow. He clung to memories of Anaya, replaying old voicemails and looking at photos until the images blurred through tears. Months stretched into years, and though he tried to rebuild, something in him remained hollow. He buried himself in work, moved to a smaller apartment, and told himself he had to move on. But late at night, when the house was quiet, he whispered her name into the dark, asking questions that had no answers. Why hadn't he been allowed to see her body? Why had everything been handled so quickly? And why did certain details in the story, dates, names, circumstances, feel just slightly off? He tried to dismiss those doubts as the paranoia of grief. Yet deep down, the unease never fully left him. By 2023, 6 years after her supposed death, Michael had learned to function again. He went to work, paid his bills, and even occasionally dated, though nothing serious. Life had become manageable, if not joyful. And then, in the most unexpected of places, everything he thought he knew unraveled. It was a bright September afternoon when Michael walked into a cafe in downtown Denver to meet his twin brother David for lunch. David, 2 years older, had always been the more charismatic sibling, confident, charming, quick with a joke. He worked in sales, lived in the same city, and though the twin brothers weren't inseparable, they kept close enough ties to see each other a few times a month. On this particular day, Michael pushed open the door of the cafe, glanced toward the corner table, and felt his stomach drop. David was there, as expected. But he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulder, was Anaya. For a moment, Michael thought he was hallucinating. The air seemed to leave his lungs, and the sounds of the cafe dulled to a low hum. The woman turned her head slightly, and the profile was unmistakable. The delicate nose, the sharp cheekbones, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear with the same habitual gesture he had seen 1,000 times. She was older, yes, but still radiant, still undeniably Anaya. She was supposed to be dead, her ashes scattered, her memory buried. Yet here she was, alive, sipping coffee as if nothing had ever happened. Michael stood frozen near the doorway until David noticed him. His brother smiled, raising a hand in greeting. "Mike, over here," he called, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. Anaya's eyes followed, and when she saw Michael, the color drained from her face. She gripped the edge of the table, her body tensing, as if bracing for an impact. Michael forced his legs to move, each step heavy with disbelief. He sat down slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "You're alive," he whispered, his voice trembling. David laughed awkwardly, glancing between them. You two know each other?" he asked, clearly sensing tension, but not grasping its magnitude. Anaya looked away, her lips pressed tightly together. The next few minutes blurred into confusion. Michael demanded answers, his voice rising despite the cafe's curious glances. How was she alive? What had happened in India? Why hadn't she contacted him? Anaya whispered, "Not here," her accent and cadence so familiar it made Michael's chest ache. David frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Mike, what's going on? You're scaring her." Michael's heart pounded as pieces of the puzzle began to shift in his mind. The uncle's vague explanations, the lack of a body, the rushed cremation, and now his twin brother sitting casually with the wife he thought he had buried. The betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. He left the cafe abruptly, his hands shaking, his mind racing. That night, he couldn't sleep. He replayed every detail of what he had seen, trying to convince himself it wasn't real. But the look in her eyes, the panic, the recognition confirmed it. She hadn't died. She had chosen to disappear. And worse, she had reappeared in his brother's life. Over the next days, Michael began watching them from a distance. He saw David and Anaya together at a park, laughing softly, as if they had built an entirely new world. He saw them leaving a grocery store, carrying bags side by side. To the outside observer, they looked like any couple, comfortable and content. But to Michael, it was an image of betrayal, layered on betrayal. The questions multiplied. How had Anaya faked her death? Why had his family gone along with the story? And most painfully, how long had David known? The grief that had shaped Michael's life for 6 years suddenly transformed into something else, something darker. He hadn't just been a widower. He had been lied to, manipulated, made to mourn a death that never happened. The ground beneath him no longer felt solid, and he knew, with a clarity that terrified him, that he would not rest until he uncovered the truth. Michael's discovery at the cafe ignited a fire that refused to die. For 6 years, he had lived in the shadows of grief, haunted by questions he thought would never be answered. Now, the truth stood before him alive, breathing, sitting across from his brother. It was betrayal, layered with deception. A wound cut twice as deep. He spent the next week in a daze, caught between disbelief and obsession. He followed David's car after work, trailing him through suburban streets to a townhouse in the outskirts of Denver. From his vantage point across the street, Michael saw lights flicker on in the living room, silhouettes moving behind the curtains. Sometimes it was David alone, slouched on the sofa with a beer. Other nights, it was Anaya, her familiar figure passing by the window, hair pulled back, moving with the same grace Michael remembered from their home in Denver years ago. Once, he saw her laughing as David handed her a glass of wine, and the sound, even muffled by distance, pierced him like a blade. The betrayal felt unbearable, but so did the silence. Michael needed answers. He considered confronting David directly, storming into the townhouse, demanding the truth. But his engineer's mind, disciplined and logical, held him back. He knew if he moved too quickly, the truth might slip away again, buried under excuses and denials. Instead, he began documenting everything. He snapped photos from his car, wrote down times and dates, and even scoured public records. That's when he found it. A marriage license, filed under David Turner and Anaya Sharma, dated just over a year ago. Michael's heart pounded as he stared at the scanned document. She hadn't just returned from the dead, she had chosen to remake her life with his twin brother. His grief, his therapy sessions, his hollow years had been nothing but the byproduct of their lie. Fueled by rage and confusion, Michael dug deeper. He contacted a former colleague in Pune, under the pretense of a business query, steering the conversation toward Anaya's supposed death. The colleague recalled whispers, even back then rumors, that the crash had been suspicious, that her body was cremated unusually fast, that her powerful uncle had handled everything quietly. When Michael pressed further, the colleague admitted something that made his blood run cold. Some people believed Anaya hadn't died at all, that she had simply vanished, shielded by her family's influence. The pieces fit together too neatly now. Anaya's uncle had orchestrated her death, the cremation, the paperwork. And somehow, in the years that followed, she had resurfaced, not just alive, but entwined with David. The betrayal wasn't just hers, it was his twin brother's as well. Michael's nights grew restless. He dreamed of Anaya calling his name, only to vanish into smoke. He woke, drenched in sweat, fists clenched, anger simmering. Friends noticed the change, urging him to move on, but he could no longer carry the weight of unanswered questions. He needed confrontation. He needed the truth from her own lips. It came one evening when he finally mustered the courage to approach the townhouse. He waited until David's truck pulled out of the driveway, then walked up the front steps and rang the bell. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, and there she was. Anaya froze at the sight of him, her eyes widening in panic. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stepped inside before she could close the door. The air between them was thick, heavy with 6 years of silence. "You're alive," he said, his voice low but firm. "And you've been with my brother." Her composure cracked. She led him into the living room, wringing her hands as she sat on the edge of the sofa. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she began. "I thought I had no choice." Michael's jaw tightened. "No choice? You let me bury you in my heart. You let me believe you were gone, tears welled in her eyes. I was in danger, Michael. Back in Pune, things weren't what they seemed. My uncle, he arranged everything. The car crash, the cremation, it was all to protect me. Protect you from what? He demanded. She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. From debts, from threats, from mistakes I made, and when I couldn't go back, when I couldn't face you, Her words faltered as she looked down. David was there. The name stung like poison. David? Michael repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. My own twin brother. I never planned for this, she pleaded. It just happened. I thought I loved you, but after everything, after all the lies and the danger, I couldn't go back to who I was with you. David offered stability, a fresh start. Michael's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to scream, to rage, but his voice came out hollow. You destroyed me, Anaya. For 6 years I mourned you. I lost myself, and all the while you were building a new life with him. Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. And in her silence, Michael felt the final fracture of the life he had once believed in. But even then, one question burned hotter than the rest. How long had David known? The confrontation with Anaya left Michael reeling, his world spinning faster than he could steady it. She had admitted to deception, to choosing his twin brother over him, but David's role remained a dagger twisting in the dark. Michael needed answers from him directly, and he wouldn't wait any longer. The next evening, Michael returned. This time, he didn't wait for David to leave. He knocked firmly, his heart pounding as footsteps approached. The door swung open, and David stood there, casual in jeans and a t-shirt, but his face stiffened when he saw Michael. We need to talk, Michael said, pushing past him into the living room. Anaya hovered in the kitchen, her eyes wide with dread. David closed the door slowly, tension radiating from his frame. So she told you, he said flatly. She told me enough, Michael snapped. That she's alive, that she's been with you. What I want to know is when you knew from the start? Or did you just stumble into my grave and decide to steal what was left? David's jaw flexed. He paced once across the room, then stopped, meeting Michael's gaze with a mix of guilt and defiance. I didn't plan this, Mike. I didn't. When she came back, she was broken, terrified. Uncle Rajesh had spun his web around her, and she didn't know who to trust. I helped her. That's all it was at first. Helping. Helping? Michael's voice cracked. You call marrying my wife helping? She wasn't your wife anymore. David shot back. She was dead, at least on paper. At least to the world. She couldn't go back to you. Not after everything. She chose me. The words hit Michael like a blow. His knees threatened to buckle, but rage steadied him. She didn't choose you. She chose survival. You took advantage of that. David's face darkened. Don't act like you know what it was like for her. You weren't there when she was unraveling, when she needed someone to hold her life together. You were grieving a ghost. I was dealing with the real woman. Anaya flinched at his words, but she didn't speak. Her silence was louder than any confession. Michael stepped closer, his voice low, dangerous. You could have told me. You could have given me the truth at any point in the last 6 years. Instead, you let me rot in grief, while you built a life on lies. David's hands curled into fists, his own anger rising. What did you expect me to do, Mike? Hand her back to you like some possession? She didn't want you anymore. She wanted me. Michael's control snapped. He lunged forward, shoving David hard against the wall. Years of pent-up rage, grief, and betrayal poured into that moment. The brothers grappled, fists flying, furniture toppling. Anaya screamed for them to stop, but neither listened. Every punch was a word unsaid, every shove a memory shattered. Finally, Michael pinned David, his fist raised. You betrayed me, he growled. David spat blood, glaring up at him. "And you were never enough for her." The words sliced deeper than any blow. Michael froze, his fist trembling in the air, his chest heaving. Slowly, he lowered his hand, stepping back. He looked at Anaya, tears streaming down her face, and realized the awful truth. Nothing he did would restore what he had lost. The Anaya he loved was gone, replaced by someone who had chosen survival over loyalty. And David, the brother he once trusted, had chosen betrayal. Breathless and broken, Michael staggered toward the door. "You can keep your lies," he said coldly, "but the truth will come out. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day, people will see you for what you are." He left without looking back, the night air hitting him like ice. His hands shook, his body ached, but for the first time in years, his path felt clear. He would not be defined by their betrayal. He would not carry their lies any longer. In the days that followed, Michael began gathering his evidence: photos, documents, timelines. He contacted attorneys, spoke with investigators, and slowly built a case. The fight wasn't over, but it had changed shape. No longer was it about reclaiming Anaya or confronting David. It was about reclaiming himself, his dignity, and the years that had been stolen from him. And as he stared at the photographs of them together, one truth hardened in his chest. Grief may have nearly destroyed him, but betrayal had forged him into something stronger. The scars would never fade, but neither would his resolve.